On retraction journalism, what the Washington Post's latest correction says about the media's coverage of President Trump and what it may have meant for those races in Georgia, those Senate races. We're going to talk to Sean Spicer and Mark Halperin. All right, welcome back. It was Jonathan Swift, not Mark Twain, who often gets credit for it, but Jonathan Swift who first said, "A lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting its shoes on." This is at least according to the New York Times. No one really knows for sure who first said that quote, but it's a great line, so who cares, right? Let's go with it. There are a few other quotes that journalists love to throw around. If it bleeds, it leads. Don't shoot the messenger, which is in other words saying don't blame us for just pushing some clickbait. A lot of journalists like to hide behind that. Also, never let the facts get in the way of a good story. You hear that from journalists behind the scenes. Now, think about that as we learn more about the Washington Post's latest retraction here, and try not to think about what would have or could have or maybe should have been down in Georgia and those special Senate runoff elections. Had most of the legacy media not latched on to a cute little headline and the alliteration in that headline from the Washington Post, which supposedly quoted Donald Trump as saying, "Find the fraud." We do know now that the media coverage certainly wasn't fair.
President Trump personally called Georgia's lead elections investigator and demanded that person produce evidence which didn't exist.
A second call from President Trump to Georgia officials about trying to overturn the election, find the fraud, and then that person would be a national hero.
Trump making that call was essentially interfering in an active investigation when he asked the top investigator to, quote, find the fraud.
Find the fraud.
Urging them to, quote, find the fraud. This was first reported by the Washington Post.
First reported by the Washington Post and then reported by everyone else, not us, of course. We, on that day that this story broke, urged everyone to listen to the audio if they actually can. The Washington Post now has corrected that January 9th story about former President Trump, and the headline has been changed, but it still reads this: Trump pressured a Georgia elections investigator in a separate call legal experts say could amount to obstruction. The article now also includes a lengthy correction, and it says that Trump never told a Georgia elections investigator in December to, quote, find the fraud in 2020. The Post says it misquoted Trump's comment based on information provided by an unnamed source. Instead, the Post now says Trump urged the investigator to scrutinize ballots in Fulton County, Georgia, asserting that she would find dishonesty there. A pretty big difference. Let's welcome in now Mark Halperin, host of the Mark Halperin Focus Group right here on Newsmax TV, to talk more about this. You know, Mark, this is a lesson for all of us because, I'm not against using unnamed sources, but you really have to check it sometimes. The other lesson I'm taking away here is, we need to kind of avoid the alliteration sometimes. It is a tendency of all of us to get attracted to these cute little phrases because they sound similar, they start with the same letters, but this is how a fire or a prairie fire starts and just travels so fast.
John, viewers of this channel all the time look at what gets reported in the media, and often we'll see problems with it. Often they'll see a bias against conservatives and Republicans. This is not a run-of-the-mill case of that. This is a case of a news organization getting something wrong and running with it. And maybe their source lied to them on purpose. That happens. But I think the more egregious thing is other news organizations like CNN claim to have confirmed the Washington Post story, ran that story themselves in the same hysterical fashion. And today, in CNN's media newsletter devoted to holding the press accountable, about their 20th item is about the Washington Post correction. Mm-hmm. They don't even mention that CNN itself made the same error and has corrected it quietly. So I think this is not a run-of-the-mill example of liberal bias in the media. This is an example of just how much the press decided to be an anti-Trump organ and how dangerous that is in our democracy when people purporting to be in charge of helping to protect the public interest decide to take sides.
We need good journalism in this country in order to have a functioning democracy right now. And when you see stories like this one, this is not, an isolated incident too, Mark. This, I agree with you, is more egregious than most, but we see this all the time, whether it's with a tweet or something, something goes out there, it gets viral, and then, oh, by the way, we actually found out after the fact that this turns out to be true. What do you think the ultimate solution for this is? Because I'm not calling for censorship or canceling anyone. You would like to think a free market would have a solution here, but it doesn't, apparently.
Well, in this instance, there should be front page or prominent stories on every major website in the country of any organization that covers the media and how the media works. And there are not. As I said, CNN buried this and didn't own up to accountability. I looked in all the major newspapers that are liberally biased papers today that purport to be independent and not down the middle. Not a lot of coverage or any coverage at all, except that Washington Post correction. So I think organizations should hold themselves accountable, should hold others accountable. And longer term, I think these organizations should do two things. One is they should not hire biased people. They should hire people who want to be journalists, not people who want to be advocates. And then they should think about their sourcing. And if somebody in the newsroom says, hey, I confirm this big CNN scoop or this big Washington Post scoop, they should make sure that they didn't confirm it with the same people who provided the original information, because that could be garbage in, garbage out. It's not confirming a story if you just get the same bad information from the original source.
Right. And, the issue now we have is so often used, these unnamed sources, by a lot of reporters now. It really does raise a lot of red flags. Let's change the conversation a little bit, because President Trump can't send out a tweet to retract this. He did send out a statement, though, on this, and we'll talk about that later. But I want to talk about what President Trump has been up to. Looks like he's having a good time down in Mar-a-Lago, making a couple of appearances this past weekend. He showed up at the Big Dog Ranch Rescue fundraising event at Mar-a-Lago. If you were there, you know it was a big-time event. Lara Trump was also there. He also made an appearance at a campaign stop for Sarah Huckabee Sanders at Mar-a-Lago. She, of course, is running for governor of Arkansas. And then you have these two contradictory headlines. One from the Washington Post that says, Donald Trump is fading away, Republicans ought to celebrate. That's an opinion piece. There's this one, though, from CBS News. Virginia Republican candidates for governor show grip Trump has on party. So again, Mark, they try to perpetuate these narratives, but which one is it? Is Donald Trump losing grip on the Republican Party, or is it still firm?
Well, I think it's in the middle. I don't take issue with those headlines, because I think they both speak to a portion of the truth. I've been surprised at how quickly part of his grip on the party has diminished. Now, is that because of social media? Is that doesn't have access to his accounts? Is it because of the events of January 6th? I don't know exactly. I'm still working on that and doing reporting on that. But there's no doubt in my mind that less than 2 months out of office, the former president is not as powerful as I thought he would be in certain aspects of what's going on with the party. At the same time, there's no doubt that he is the most powerful person in the party, and that almost anyone, regardless of where they fall on the spectrum on the center right, regardless of what office they're running for, what state they're in, almost anyone who wants to be the Republican nominee for any particular office or is already an incumbent, almost all of them would like President Trump's endorsement, would like his help raising money. And so he is the most important and powerful person in the party. He's the front runner for 2024 if he wants to run. But again, there are subtle ways and some less subtle where his influence and control is not what it was, not surprising because he's not out of office, but less than I thought it would be.
And, as someone who's studied this for a long time, you know that power isn't static. It kind of goes around, and, power isn't created or destroyed. It's going to be somewhere. And there are needs for people besides Donald Trump to, run the Republican Party, do certain things. We had this meeting with Rick Scott and Mitch McConnell not too long ago, not the most popular guys among the Trump base, but their fundraising prowess is important. And, Mitch McConnell, I call him Trench McConnell. We've talked about this in the past. He's out there trolling Joe Biden a little bit on Twitter. He said this: why did President Biden tell Americans to wait until July 4th to gather in ways that city states and the CDC approved right now? And of course, this is you can just picture his very dry, kind of monotone voice chiding Joe Biden here. But again, you do see that there is some overlap in the Venn diagram on how Mitch McConnell and guys like President Trump and Rick Scott can all work together for the greater Republican goal. And that's getting a majority in either the Senate or the House.
Well, not just the goal, John, but I think they share a lot, which we saw at CPAC in President Trump's speech, the only big public event he's done so far, where he laid out an agenda that's largely a critique of the Biden administration and the wider culture that I think is right in sync with the way Mitch McConnell sees things, right. Rick Scott, Kevin McCarthy, both in terms of how they're engaging in government now, but also how they see the midterm elections. That's talking about China. That's talking about immigration. It's talking about cancel culture. It's talking about other aspects of Biden policy that they all have a problem with. So whereas some cast President Trump is sort of out of step with the rest of the party, a lot of that has to do with January 6th. A lot of that has to do with their blaming President Trump for things related to January 6th and some of the other aspects of the party coalition. But on the core issues that the party is currently talking about, they are in sync, and no one has a bigger megaphone than Donald Trump.
You know, it's
Kevin
interesting.
McCarthy went to
let's bring in Sean Spicer now, because he is ready for us. And I want to bring him in on this conversation to talk more about this, Sean, because this would not be the first time in history that the two folks in the same party didn't necessarily agree on everything, but they agreed to disagree in a way that makes it possible for the party to still progress and win.
Yeah, well, look, I will say this. Mark was right. In many cases, their policy objectives are aligned. It's who can advance the conservative agenda, who can continue to put judges as a priority and pass conservative policies. So in a lot of ways, they are in sync. I think the president just wants a little bit more homage to him from certain candidates than McConnell really, frankly, cares about. But I will say this. If you are running in a Republican primary, from student council to the president of the United States in this country right now, the more aligned with President Trump you are, the greater degree of possibility of winning you have. Meaning it's not just saying it, right? You can't just go out and be like, I am the Trump candidate. You have to be able to prove it, and whether that's an endorsement from the president, from Don Jr., or from allies and associates of the president. The closer you are actually to the president, not that you say you are, but that you actually are, the greater likelihood you have of winning that primary.
Right, and we talked about this with Jason Miller about the process they're going to come up with. So there's questionnaires, there's a real vetting process, not just based on emotion here. And Sean, we were just talking too about the CBS News article that talked about the Virginia gubernatorial race here, and it shows how tight President Trump's grip is on the Republican Party. You also had a Washington Post headline that says Donald Trump is fading away. Republicans ought to celebrate. Mark said it's somewhere in the middle. How do you see it?
Well, first of all, I live here in Virginia. I will tell you, it is. Look, I don't think any of these guys in the mainstream media have a handle on this. Virginia is choosing its gubernatorial nominee by convention. That means these are the real grassroots folks that go out there, and they're going to reward the folks that have been loyal to the grassroots, that have been involved in the grassroots. And I don't trust a bunch of Washington reporters to think that they have a clue as to what that means. The second thing is that, as I said earlier, and this goes for the Virginia race as well, but whoever has the closeness to President Trump. And again, it's just not saying it. Anybody can say they're a Trump Republican, that they're supporting America First priorities. But the closer they actually are to having the president's support, whether that's him or the family or top associates, the greater likelihood they have of winning. That's it, full stop. And I think that you're going to see that in race around the country. That doesn't mean you can win a general election. That's a very different race. But in terms of a primary, whether it's San Francisco or Virginia or Rhode Island or Florida, in any primary for any office, the closer you are to Trump, the greater likelihood you have of winning.
Now, it's an interesting point, too, as we look at the Ohio Senate race, too, with that announcement yesterday that Peter Thiel, who did speak at President Trump's Republican National Convention in 2016 as a Trump supporter, he's getting behind J.D. Vance, the author in Ohio, of course, according to one report I read yesterday. And then you got Josh Mandel out there who's trying to run right next to Donald Trump on every single issue. We see the influence that the former president still has.
And also you've got, look, and you have Jane Timken, right, who was the hand-picked person for the state party by the Trump team. So that could, but I will say this, the one thing that JD has, $10 million goes a long way in a primary spent through a super PAC. But number two is that he was very close to Jared Kushner and some other folks in the White House. So I think that this is going to be a race. The thing that Mandel, I think, doesn't have is any real association with the Trump team, legitimately. The other two folks, I think it's going to be a horse race to who gets more folks from the team Trump on their team and then does an organizing effort to get those people out to vote.
And again, this leads me to believe that we're seeing more of the CBS News type situation in Virginia, where everybody wants to be associated with Donald Trump. They want to run as, to the right of Donald Trump in many situations, and it's the American First agenda continuing. Sean, great to see you. Mark, thanks for joining us as well.
Hey, I'm Rob Finnerty. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please join the conversation in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, too. Hit the bell icon to be alerted to breaking news. And remember, there's a whole lot more on Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news network. Newsmax TV, we're real news for real people.